Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're going way back to the Roman Empire.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, around 50 or 51 AD to unpack one of the earliest letters in Christianity,
Okay.
First Thessalonians. We've got your notes and some extra research lined up, so get ready to uncover what life was like for the very first Christian communities and how their story still speaks to us today.
What's so fascinating about this letter is it gives us a direct line to the heart of a brand new faith, facing all kinds of challenges. We
Yeah.
often think of these texts as ancient history, but imagine hearing these words for the first time in a world where Christianity was a radical,
Right.
even dangerous idea.
It's almost like eavesdropping on a conversation
Right.
between Paul, Silas, and Timothy on one side and this fledgling church in Thessalonica on the other.
Yeah.
There's this urgency, this
Yeah.
deep care woven through the text.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Paul wasn't just writing a theological treatise, he was pouring out his heart to people he loved, offering guidance and comfort amidst real persecution.
Yeah.
And remember, this is just a few decades after the life of Jesus. The echoes of his teachings are still incredibly fresh.
One of the things that jumps out at me is how Paul constantly emphasizes the importance of faith, hope, and love.
Yes,
They're not just abstract ideas to him, they're vital tools for survival.
absolutely. Think about the historical context. These early Christians are often ostracized, facing social and political pressure, even threats to their lives.
Yeah.
In that kind of environment, faith becomes your anchor, hope your fuel, and love the bond that holds the community together.
Yeah, it's like these virtues form a sort of shield protecting them from the harsh realities around them. And it makes me wonder, how can we in our modern world tap into that same kind of resilience? What are the anchors of faith and hope that sustain us when things get tough?
That's a powerful question. And it speaks to the enduring relevance of Paul's message. Maybe it's not physical persecution we face today, but we all have our own struggles, our own anxieties. Perhaps exploring how faith, hope, and love manifested in the lives of these early Christians can offer us a roadmap for navigating our own challenges.
You mentioned anxiety, and it's interesting because one of the things that was really causing a stir in the Thessalonian church was the whole concept of the second coming. It's a major theme in the letter, isn't it?
It is. And you can understand why. Imagine the intensity of trying to grasp a completely new worldview, a new understanding of time and eternity, then add in the very real possibility of persecution or even martyrdom.
Wow.
It's no wonder they were fixated on the idea of Christ's return.
So how does Paul address that? Does he give them a timeline, a set of predictions, or does he approach it differently?
He does something much more profound. He offers a framework for living in the in-between, that space between Christ's first coming and his promised return. He reminds them and us that living in eager anticipation doesn't mean being paralyzed by fear or constantly looking over your shoulder. It's about living each day grounded in faith, hope, and love, precisely those virtues we were just discussing.
That's a powerful shift in perspective. It's not about escaping the present moment, but about infusing it with meaning and purpose. But I'm curious, the early Christians faced such extreme circumstances. Can we really draw parallels to our own lives today?
Think about it this way. The human experience of uncertainty, of grappling with questions about life and death, hasn't really changed that much. Whether it's facing persecution, a global pandemic, or simply the anxieties of daily life, we all need a source of strength, a way to make sense of the world around us.
Okay, I'm starting to see how First Thessalonians, despite being written in a very specific context, still has this universal appeal. But let's get a little more granular here. We've talked about the big themes, but there are some specific verses that really stand out.
Absolutely. One that always resonates with me is 1 Thessalonians 2:7-8. In it, Paul compares himself and his companions to a nursing mother caring for her children. It's a powerful image, isn't it?
Yeah.
It speaks to the depth of his affection for the Thessalonians.
Thinking about this letter as written by a nursing mother is really interesting. Imagine you're in the shoes of someone hearing this for the first time in the ancient world. What kind of emotions would that evoke?
It would be incredibly moving, wouldn't it? To hear this figure of authority, this apostle, express such tenderness and vulnerability. It humanizes Paul and makes his message even more poignant. He's not just dictating doctrine, he's sharing his heart, his deep love for these new believers.
And it reminds us that even in the midst of theological discussions and debates, Christianity is at its core about relationship.
Yeah,
It's about connection, about belonging to something larger than ourselves.
exactly. And that brings us to another key theme that runs throughout 1 Thessalonians, the importance of community. Paul constantly emphasizes the need for mutual support, encouragement, and accountability within the Christian community.
And that's something that's just as relevant today as it was back then. We all need a sense of belonging, a place where we can be ourselves, share our struggles, and find support. But in a world that often feels increasingly fragmented and isolated, how do we create that kind of community?
That's a question we'll delve into a bit later, but for now, let's turn our attention to another striking verse, 1 Thessalonians 4:3 to 8. Here, Paul addresses the issue of holiness and ethical conduct, particularly in the realm of sexual purity.
Now, this is where things get a little, well, spicy. How did that message go down in a culture that, shall we say, had very different standards?
Remember, Paul is calling the Thessalonians to a higher standard, one rooted in their new identity in Christ. He's not just laying down a set of rules, but inviting them to live a life transformed by God's grace.
It's fascinating how these ancient teachings still spark conversations and debates today. But before we dive too deep into that, let's take a quick break to process what we've uncovered so far. We'll be right back with more insights from 1 Thessalonians. Welcome back to the deep dive. We were talking about how Paul addressed some pretty sensitive topics, urging this new community to embrace a different way of life.
Yes, and it's important to remember the cultural backdrop here.
Yeah.
The Roman Empire was not known for its sexual restraint, and the city of Thessalonica was a bustling port with all the temptations that came with it.
So Paul's message of purity and holiness would really stood out. It's like he's drawing a line in the sand, challenging the very norms of the society they lived in.
Exactly. He's calling them to a countercultural way of life, a life set apart by their commitment to Christ. And he doesn't shy away from the hard conversations, even addressing specific behaviors that would have been widely accepted at the time.
Which probably caused some friction, I imagine. But it's interesting how he frames it. It's not just about following rules for the sake of rules. He connects it back to this idea of living a life transformed by God's grace.
Right. He emphasizes that this call to holiness isn't about earning God's favor, but about reflecting the transformation that's already happened in their hearts. It's about becoming more like Christ, embracing a new way of being in the world.
Okay, so we've got faith, hope, and love as these essential virtues. A call to holiness amidst a culture of anything goes, and this looming sense of Christ's return. It's a lot to unpack even for us today. But before we get overwhelmed, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, community. Why is it such a central theme in this letter?
Well, think about it. These early Christians were often marginalized, facing opposition from both their families and the wider society. They needed each other. They needed a place where they could find acceptance, encouragement, and practical support.
So community wasn't just a nice to have, it was essential for their survival, their ability to withstand the pressures around them.
Exactly. And Paul emphasizes this over and over again. He calls them to encourage one another and build each other up, to rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep, to carry each other's burdens.
It's a beautiful picture of what a true community of faith should look like, isn't it? And it makes me think about how we can create that kind of space in our own lives, in our own churches and communities.
Yes, because Paul's message isn't confined to the first century. His words resonate just as strongly today. We all need those places of belonging, those safe havens where we can be authentic, vulnerable, and supported.
So let's dive a little deeper into that. What are some practical ways we can cultivate that kind of community, that sense of mutual support and encouragement?
Well, first, we have to be willing to be vulnerable ourselves, to let others see our struggles, our doubts, our imperfections. That creates space for others to do the same.
It's about moving beyond the superficial, the I'm fine, everything's great facade that we often present to the world. It's about being real with each other.
Right. And it's also about being present for others, listening without judgment, offering a shoulder to cry on celebrating each other's victories. It's about showing up for each other in both the big moments and the everyday moments.
It's about recognizing that we're all in this together, walking alongside each other on this journey of faith, and that even in the midst of our differences, our imperfections, we can find strength and unity in our shared commitment to Christ.
Absolutely. And Paul doesn't just talk about community in abstract terms. He gives us concrete examples of how it should function. For instance, in chapter 5, he addresses the issue of dealing with those who are idle or disorderly.
Okay, that sounds a bit harsh. Is he saying we should just shun anyone who doesn't meet our standards?
Not at all. He's calling for a balance between grace and accountability.
Mm-hmm.
He encourages the Thessalonians to admonish those who are out of line, but to do so with gentleness and love.
So it's about holding each other accountable, but doing so in a way that's constructive and compassionate, not judgmental or condemning.
Exactly. And it's about remembering that we all make mistakes. We all fall short. Community isn't about being perfect. It's about supporting each other through those imperfections.
It's about creating a space where grace and forgiveness abound, where we can help each other grow and mature in our faith.
Now let's shift gears for a moment and revisit the topic of the second coming. We've talked about how Paul addressed the Thessalonians' anxieties, but there's a particular passage that I think is worth examining in more detail.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Which one are you thinking of?
1 Thessalonians 4:16-17. This is where Paul describes the event itself, and he uses some incredibly vivid imagery. He talks about the Lord descending from heaven with a loud command, the voice of the archangel, and the trumpet call of God.
Wow, that's intense. It's like something straight out of a blockbuster movie. But what did Paul actually mean by all of this? Was he trying to scare them, or was there a deeper message behind these dramatic descriptions?
I think there are a few things to unpack here. First, it's important to remember that Paul is writing to a culture that was steeped in apocalyptic imagery. This kind of language would have resonated deeply with his audience.
So he's speaking their language using familiar metaphors to convey a complex theological concept.
Exactly. But beyond that, I think Paul is trying to convey the sheer magnitude of the event, the awe-inspiring power of Christ's return. He wants them to understand that this is not just an ordinary event. It's a cosmic turning point, a moment that will change everything.
And in the midst of all this drama, this cosmic spectacle, there's this beautiful image of the believers being caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air.
Yes, and I think that's where the real comfort lies. In the midst of all the uncertainty, the upheaval, there's this assurance that we won't face it alone. We'll be united with Christ, with each other, in a way that transcends anything we can imagine.
It's a powerful image of hope, isn't it? A reminder that even in the face of the unknown, even in the face of death itself, we are not abandoned. We are claimed, we are loved, and we will be reunited with those who have gone before us.
And that brings us back to the themes of faith, hope, and love that we've been exploring throughout this deep dive. They're not just abstract concepts. They're the very things that sustain us, that anchor us, that give us the strength to face whatever lies ahead.
It's like a thread that runs through the entire letter, weaving together all these seemingly disparate themes into a cohesive whole.
Exactly. And as we move into the final part of our exploration of 1 Thessalonians, we'll see how Paul brings all of these threads together, offering a powerful conclusion to his letter of encouragement and exhortation.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've journeyed through themes of faith, hope, and love, explored the call to holiness and the anxiety surrounding the second coming, all within the context of building a strong community. But there's one more layer to uncover in 1 Thessalonians.
You're right. It's like the undercurrent of a river, subtle yet incredibly powerful. And that's the theme of encouragement. It's woven throughout the entire letter, almost like Paul's own heartbeat pulsing through his words.
Now that you mention it, I realize we've seen it everywhere in the way he addresses their fears, in the tenderness he expresses, even in his admonishment. There's always this underlying sense of encouragement. It's not just a pep talk. It's woven into the very fabric of the letter.
It's like he knows exactly what this fledgling community needs to hear. Remember, they're facing real hardship, real opposition. So Paul reminds them of their strengths, celebrates their progress, and constantly points them back to the source of their hope.
One verse that always struck me as particularly encouraging is 1 Thessalonians 5:24. The one who calls you is faithful, and he will do it. It's so simple, yet so profound.
Right.
It speaks to that deep trust in God's unwavering commitment to us.
It's like a lifeline in the midst of a storm. No matter what we're facing, no matter how dark things may seem, we can hold on to that promise. God is faithful, and he will complete the work he began in us.
I love how you phrase that. It's not just about getting through tough times. It's about becoming who we're meant to be, about embracing the ongoing process of transformation.
Precisely. And Paul doesn't just offer encouragement from a position of authority. He reminds the Thessalonians and us that we're called to encourage one another.
Oh, that's a good point.
It's not a one-way street. It's about building each other up, being a source of strength and support for one another.
That makes me think of 1 Thessalonians 5:11. Therefore, encourage one another and build each other up, just as, in fact, you are doing. It's like a blueprint for healthy community, for creating a space where we can both give and receive encouragement.
And it goes beyond just offering words of affirmation. It's about celebrating each other's victories, offering a listening ear, being present in both the joys and the sorrows. It's about actively participating in each other's lives, walking alongside each other on this journey of faith.
It strikes me that this call to mutual encouragement is particularly relevant in our world today, where social media often amplifies negativity and comparison. Imagine if we shifted our focus, became more intentional about being a source of encouragement for those around us.
Imagine the ripple effect that would create. A single act of encouragement can brighten someone's day, shift their perspective, even inspire them to keep going when they feel like giving up.
It's like planting seeds of hope and kindness, watching them blossom into something beautiful and life-giving.
And I think that's a fitting image as we bring our deep dive into First Thessalonians to a close. This letter, written nearly 2,000 years ago, continues to offer us guidance, encouragement, and a profound vision for what it means to live a life grounded in faith, hope, and love.
It's been an incredible journey, hasn't it? Unpacking these ancient words and discovering how they still speak to us today, offering timeless wisdom for navigating the challenges and embracing the joys of our modern lives.
So as we reflect on all that we've explored, here's a question for you to ponder. Knowing that First Thessalonians was written to comfort and encourage early Christians facing persecution, what message in this letter do you find most comforting or inspiring in your own life today?
That's a great question to carry with you as you continue to explore this incredible book. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into First Thessalonians.
Ah,
We'll see you next time, ready to uncover more fascinating insights and hidden gems from history, science, and culture.